1 minute ago, Diddy's secret link to Oprah Winfrey revealed, and it changes everything. This is not just another headline. It's not tabloid rumor or social media noise. It's the kind of story that starts quiet, buried in back pages, dismissed as a coincidence until it doesn't. Until it spirals into a chain of events that links some of the most powerful names in American pop culture to something far darker than image or influence. This today is about connections, about control, and about a man who somehow stands in the center of three separate disasters and walks away clean every single time. We begin not with Diddy, not even with Oprah, but with John Pelletier, a name that until recently meant very little outside the state of Nevada, a career law enforcement officer, a by-the-book police chief in Las Vegas, later in Maui. No scandals, no gossip, just calm authority. Until a little-known article surfaced in late 2024. It didn't go viral. Most people didn't even see it. But that article casually dropped a bomb Pelletier, it claimed, had transporting connections to both Diddy and Oprah. No explanation. No evidence. Just a whisper in digital print. And then months later, like a storm following thunder, came the lawsuit. Ashley Parham, a name now etched into court records and public discourse. Her accusations harrowing. She describes being taken against her will, controlled, and silenced. The details in her testimony aren't just disturbing, they are systemic. Coordinated and embedded in the paperwork is a name that most expected to fade away. John Pelletier. Not a side figure, not a footnote. A key player. Allegedly impersonating law enforcement in a different state. Shutting down Parham's attempt to report what had happened to her. And here's where the picture widens. Pelletier wasn't stationed in California at the time. He was a police chief in Las Vegas. So what was he doing there? Why would he involve himself in a case with no jurisdictional connection? And more importantly, who gave him the authority to intervene? The silence around those questions is deafening. But this isn't the first time Pelletier has been the calm face in the middle of chaos. In 2017, he was the incident commander during the Las Vegas mass, shooting the deadliest in U.S. history. 58 lives lost, hundreds wounded. And amidst the chaos, he was the one making decisions on footage, on narratives, on what the public would and wouldn't see. Fast forward to 2023, Maui. A firestorm unlike any other. Lives lost roads, closed residents trapped. Questions flooded in. Why were escape routes barricaded? Why were journalists kept out? Why did it feel like help never came? At the podium again was John Pelletier. Polished, collected, unflinching. But now the pattern is undeniable. 3 major incidents. One man in control. And one unsettling thought, what if he wasn't just reacting to these crises, but shaping them? The voice of calm, the face of order. But the deeper you dig, the more the narrative fractures. In her lawsuit, Parham doesn't just accuse Diddy and his circle. She describes a cleanup operation, one that involved fake badges, intimidation, and erasure. And at the center, the man in uniform. A man who she claims wasn't there to help, but to ensure silence. Pelletier has denied the accusations. He says he hasn't been served. He insists the claims are without merit. But what he hasn't done is answer one simple question. Why does his name keep appearing where disaster strikes? And it's here that Oprah Winfrey re-enters the frame. She isn't named in the lawsuit. She hasn't been accused of any wrongdoing. But her connection, if the 2024 article is to be believed, is enough to raise questions. She owns extensive land in Maui, the very land that burned while barricades blocked escape. The very land where Pelletier, as police chief, controlled the response. Coincidence? It's possible. But the public now connecting the dots is no longer convinced. The strength of Pelletier's denial has only fueled speculation. If he is truly innocent, then he is the most unfortunate figure in modern law enforcement history. But if the threads in Parham's lawsuit are real, then we may be looking at something far more disturbing, a person whose role is not to protect, but to protect people from consequences. As this story unfolds, the public eye has sharpened. The silence that once protected institutions is cracking, and the man once praised for stability is now being re-examined under a different light. Not as a hero, not even as a bystander, but as the constant. To understand why this story has gripped the nation, you have to hear the voice at the heart of it. Ashley Parham wasn't looking for attention. Her name wasn't in the headlines before the lawsuit. She didn't speak in sound bites or chase cameras. But when her testimony surfaced, it hit like a seismic wave, not because of its shock value, but because of its structure. It wasn't just a personal account, it was a blueprint. A step-by-step breakdown of how silence gets built and who does the building. Her statement begins in 2018. She describes a night that started with trust and ended in terror. The specifics sealed in legal filings point to entrapment, isolation, a calculated process of control, and then the aftermath. She did what victims are taught to do. She went to the authorities. She tried to file a report. She expected protocol. But what she got was something else entirely. According to Parham, the man who met her wasn't from the jurisdiction. He wasn't even supposed to be there. But he wore a badge, spoke with authority, told her to stay quiet for her own safety. That man, she says, was John Pelletier. There was no follow-up, no investigation, just silence. And from that silence, years passed. Until now. What makes Parham's case different isn't just the detail, it's the way it intersects with a larger pattern. Her story alone would raise questions of us, but when you place it against Pelletier's past, his proximity to crisis, his control over chaos, those questions multiply. The Vegas shooting, the Maui wildfires, the sudden appearance during Parham's complaint. All of it now under scrutiny, especially when you factor in one haunting detail, the control of footage, what gets seen, what gets erased. It's not just about whether Pelletier helped cover up a crime, it's about whether he helped engineer silence on a much broader scale. And then there's the legal framing. Parham's lawsuit doesn't just target the alleged perpetrators, it outlines the system that allowed them to operate. The enablers, the protectors, the mechanisms of denial, the subtle shifts of narrative. As public attention intensifies, experts have begun weighing in. Legal analysts point to the unusual nature of the accusations, especially the charge that Pelletier posed as an officer from a different department. That's not just misconduct. If proven, it would represent a coordinated obstruction of justice. And the timing chilling. His alleged appearance happened months after his role in the Vegas shooting, a time when public trust in his authority was at its peak, when few would question his presence. But now people are questioning everything. Back in Maui, survivors from the wildfire are beginning to speak out again, recalling blocked roads, trapped families, the feeling that something didn't add up. And in those recollections, one name keeps resurfacing. Pelletier. Not as a scapegoat, but as the face of calm in the middle of chaos. A calm that, in hindsight, feels almost rehearsed. And then there's the media response. At first, outlets tread carefully. The Oprah connection made it sensitive. Diddy's legal team issued blanket denials. But as court documents became public, the silence began to fracture. Journalists began re-examining footage from past events. Timelines were recompiled. Witnesses re-interviewed. Patterns began to emerge. Suddenly, a story that once seemed like a lawsuit turned into something much larger. A narrative about power, not just celebrity power, but the power to vanish facts, to obscure truth, to step into moments of tragedy and steer what the public sees. And as that narrative grew, the public began to wonder, is this about one bad actor? Or is Pelletier a symbol of something even more organized? What did Las Vegas, Maui, and a sealed complaint in California have in common? At first glance, nothing. One was the site of the deadliest mass shooting in modern American history. Another, a climate disaster that left neighborhoods in ashes. The third, a personal account of intimidation tied to a celebrity lawsuit. Separate timelines, separate tragedies. But look closer, and a single name threads through all three: John Pelletier. If this were fiction, it would feel too convenient, too scripted. Yet, the documented presence of the same law enforcement figure at the heart of three crises is not fiction. It's public record, and the implications are still sinking in. In 2017, as bullets rained down on the Vegas Strip, Pelletier was there. Not just present, but in command. His title, Incident Commander. That role put him in charge of response decisions, of what information got released, of which security camera footage was shown, and which remained locked away. Witnesses at the scene described multiple shooters. Official reports said there was only one. Many asked why early footage vanished from platforms, why some statements were later redacted, why the story evolved so quickly. Then came the wildfires in Maui 2023. A different state, a different crisis, but the same pattern. Residents described blocked roads, barricades that made no sense, entire families trapped, and during the aftermath, Pelletier was again the face of control, standing at press podiums, reassuring the public, promising investigations, managing the message. But as survivor testimonies poured in, contradictions emerged. Footage leaked that contradicted official timelines. Eyewitnesses described being turned around by law enforcement as flames approached. And, again, the spotlight turned to the man leading the response. There's a word for this kind of repetition choreography. Not coincidence, not mistake. Choreography suggests structure. A script. Someone placed in the exact position to control outcomes not through conspiracy, but through institutional familiarity, through trust, and Pelletier had it. Until now. The lawsuit filed by Ashley Parham didn't just pull back the curtain on one incident, it prompted a public reevaluation of everything he's touched. His denials, once accepted at face value, are now parsed line by line. He insists he hasn't been served, that the allegations are baseless, that he's done nothing wrong. But for many, the question is no longer about guilt, it's about patterns, about the mechanism of evasion. Why, in crisis after crisis, does Pelletier emerge as the voice of calm? Why is he always there, where evidence is thinnest and explanations feel rehearsed? Legal analysts point to a growing theory that Pelletier may not simply be a police chief, but something else. A fixer. Someone embedded not just to enforce order, but to manage consequences. A bridge between public institutions and private power. This brings us back to Oprah Winfrey. She's not a defendant. She hasn't issued a statement. But the same 2024 article that linked Pelletier to Diddy also mentioned Oprah. Not by accusation, but by implication. The term used was transporting connections. Again, vague, but potent enough to stir public suspicion, especially when you remember her real estate holdings in Maui. The land where tragedy struck. The land where residents were trapped. The land where Pelletier held press conferences. In another time, such associations might be dismissed, but the climate has changed. The public is paying closer attention, looking for fingerprints, asking who decides what we know. And for the first time, Pelletier is being asked to answer. His defenders say this is all speculation, that patterns don't prove intention. But survivors from Vegas, from Maui, and now from private lawsuits are telling a different story. One of consistency, of silence enforced, of power quietly exercised behind the curtain, and now, under growing public pressure, cracks are forming. Local officials are distancing themselves. The mayor of Maui has called for his resignation. Advocacy groups are demanding independent investigations. The question is no longer whether something happened. It's how long it's been happening, and how deep it goes. It was bound to break. For years, the events that followed each disaster felt disconnected, moments of pain, confusion, and brief flashes of outrage quickly buried beneath the next crisis. But with the emergence of the Ashley Parham lawsuit, a thread began to pull, and with it, a pattern unraveled. Not just in names and places, but in the very mechanisms that govern what the public sees and what it's told to forget. At the center, John Pelletier. But this time, something changed. This time, the narrative didn't hold. The lawsuit didn't vanish into legal limbo. It was read. It was shared. And for the first time, Pelletier wasn't seen as the steady voice at the podium. He was the story. The public reaction was swift and seismic. Online forums that once speculated about conspiracies turned into crowdsourced investigations. Former officers began speaking anonymously. Journalists re-examined timelines placing Pelletier at the heart of decisions, now seen under a darker light. And the pressure wasn't just digital. In Maui, where memories of the wildfire remain, raw, survivors organized. Protesters stood outside government buildings, holding up signs not with slogans, but with questions: who blocked the roads, who gave the order. Inside council chambers, the mayor didn't mince words. Accountability must start somewhere, he said, and it starts with leadership. That leadership until now had refused to bend. Pelletier released another statement doubling down on his innocence. He had not been charged. He had not been served. He was, in his words, a target of distraction, not justice. But that defense, once enough to quiet critics, now rang hollow. The weight of recurring events, the manipulation of footage in Vegas, the confusion in Maui, the impersonation alleged in California, has built a wall of doubt that no public relations statement can undo. This is where the broader reckoning begins. Because if Pelletier's actions were part of a larger system, the question then becomes who benefits from that system. This is where the names grow more powerful. Diddy, a household figure. Oprah, a national icon. Neither has been proven to have committed wrongdoing. Neither is a defendant. But their connection, however distant, forces an uncomfortable reflection. How much of what we believe about powerful figures is real, and how much is managed? It's not just about celebrity. It's about infrastructure, about who controls emergency response, who decides what gets seen, who can be in two places at once, carrying two identities without anyone asking why. And here's the twist. Despite everything, the noise, the pressure, the lawsuits, John Pelletier has not resigned. He remains in office, still signing memos, still overseeing responses, still in theory able to appear at the scene of the next disaster, which forces the public to ask, if this man, after all that's come to light, is still in charge, then how many others like him are out there? Not famous, not infamous, just invisible middlemen, trusted with truth, armed with access, quietly working behind the scenes where power needs insulation. The tragedy is not just in what happened in Vegas or Maui or to Ashley Parham. The tragedy is in how normal it all seems now. That when someone steps forward with a story that breaks the silence, the first question isn't what happened, but how long before it's buried again. That is the cost of silence. And the longer it lasts, the harder it hits when it finally shatters. The moment always comes, when the press conferences end, when the hashtags fade, when the public once galvanized returns to routine. The question becomes what remains. In the story of John Pelletier, the answer is complicated. What began as a murmur, an overlooked article, a nearly ignored lawsuit has now transformed into a national case study in pattern recognition. Not just of one man, but of a system. A way power moves not loudly, but in shadows. The lawsuit from Ashley Parham lit the fuse. Her story, raw and detailed, forced attention on a man who had built a career by being invisible in all the right ways. But as the legal process continues, still without an official indictment, still without Pelletier stepping down, the focus is no longer only on what he may have done. It's on what kind of world allowed it to happen. Because the real shock isn't the allegations themselves, it's how familiar they sound. the eerily similar operations across unrelated crises, the vanishing of footage, the duplication of silence, and the ease with which the same figure, same face, same badge reappears just when the story needs steering. This isn't about fame, it's about function. Pelletier has become a symbol, not just of alleged wrongdoing, but of a deeper machinery. The quiet custodians of chaos, the ones who calm the public while the truth slips through the cracks, the ones who aren't remembered until someone somewhere finally says their name. But in this case, the outcome may not be what it once was, because the people are watching now. And not just casually, they've seen the connections. Vegas, Maui, California. The slow strategic dismantling of public trust. And with each unanswered question, each unaccounted command, the demand for transparency grows louder. It's reached boardrooms and political circles. State investigations have begun informal reviews. Whistleblowers, once silent, are stepping into the light. And through it all, Pelletier remains visible, but no longer untouchable. Even the quietest systems fracture under sustained scrutiny. As for Oprah and Diddy, their place in this story remains peripheral. No charges, no statements from Oprah. Diddy's legal team continues to challenge the lawsuit. And yet, their association, however vague, has shifted public perception. Not because they've been proven guilty, but because the illusion of separation between celebrity and authority has started to collapse. For years, the idea that law enforcement could double as crisis managers for elite figures felt like fiction. But now, with public records, with mounting accounts, with a single name uniting disconnected tragedies, that fiction feels a little too close to real. So, what happens now? That depends on how the story ends, or rather, how it's allowed to end. If Pelletier steps down, it will be seen by many as the first drop in a much larger wave, a crack in the armor of untouchability. If he remains, the system will signal that no amount of public outrage is enough to override institutional protection. But either way, the curtain has fallen, the audience has seen backstage. What they do next, what we do next, will decide whether this moment becomes another entry in the long list of near reckonings, or the start of something far more lasting. In the end, stories like this aren't about heroes or villains. They're about truth and the uncomfortable silence that surrounds it. John Pelletier may still be standing, but the system that once shielded him, it's no longer invisible.